we were aware that there wasn't a central place to record certainly non-financial vulnerability when we set up. We didn't want to create case studies on every vulnerable individual in the UK, but we wanted to be able to flag up to service providers that individuals were in a certain situation. So we created the vulnerability registration service. We use a series of flags to highlight the type of vulnerability that somebody's in, and increasingly they actually pick more and more of those flags. So we know the synergies between mental health and financial difficulty. Often if somebody's vulnerable, they're not only vulnerable because of one thing. And I think the other important thing that we wanted to do is we've known about financial, people's financial circumstances for decades. We've had credit reference agencies fully out there since the early 1980s. But what we haven't done is perhaps looked at the drivers to why somebody is in financial difficulty or the fallout from that financial difficulty. And it's usually encased in some sort of non-financial problem. It might be health related, physical and mental health. It might be something that's happening in somebody's life. It might be transient vulnerability, a relationship breakdown, somebody struggling because they're recently bereaved, or it might simply be because they're having accessibility difficulties. But we wanted to give a head start to both those consumers and the organisations that are dealing with those consumers to identify that. Now, vulnerability is very much on everybody's agenda now. I don't think it was so much when we started. So we are all grappling with this, and I think all sectors are grappling with the same problems, but things are definitely moving on. So we have a database of vulnerable individuals that can be accessed by any service provider who is entitled to do so. And we collate our data from many different sources, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The flip side of what we do, though, is we want to use that data, now we have it and now it's growing, to be able to identify the people that actually need support. As I said, when you're in a vulnerable situation, when you're struggling, if you're in debt, if you're struggling with your mental health, the last thing you want to do is search around the internet, put yourself out there and find that support that's out there, even if you're entitled to it. So we wanted to start to use the data to give people a stepping stone to grasp hold of the help that's out there and start to help themselves. So it's a two-way process. Our data goes out to organisations, whether they be in financial services, whether they be in gaming, insurance, utilities, whatever it may be, public sector, but equally let's use that data to help people realise that the support that's available to them. So that's the two sides of what we're doing. I think one of the most important lessons that I've learned as well is that if you're in a vulnerable situation, one of the last things that you want to do is go and tell 25 different people the same thing. So we also see VRS as a single portal, one route into sharing that vulnerability, whatever the sector, whatever the organisation. I don't think vulnerable individuals actually care what's going on behind the scenes, but they do only want to register vulnerability once. And realistically, there aren't that many places holding details of vulnerability. GamStop hold a service in relation to people who are struggling with gambling difficulties. They don't share that data widely. And we have the priority services register, and then our next steps to move forward and share that data across energy companies, which I think is sort of desperately in need of happening. Okay, so the subject we're on today, I think biggest barriers that I have seen when it comes to sharing data about vulnerability, we've had data protection issues, which I think we are recognising shouldn't be something that stops us sharing data. We need to work with it. We need to treat data responsibility. We need to take care of it. I've had things thrown at me around technical resource, that it's not a priority yet, but I think when I talk about what the regulatory landscape looks like, it has to be a priority now. And I've had lots of people saying the problem is this is why we can't do it. None of those problems really are insurmountable. They can all be dealt with, and they shouldn't stop us doing the right thing and moving towards supporting vulnerable people. But one thing that is common across all sectors is okay, now I know an individual, a customer is vulnerable. What do I do to support them? How do I actually manage that individual and do the right thing? Because there isn't a rule book, there isn't a master plan around what we do in certain situations. Everybody's different. We're talking about human nature. And certainly it is a vast subject. No one person can know all the answers when we're talking one moment about financial difficulty and debt, people falling into the hands of illegal money lending and not being on a credit ladder. And then at the same time, we're talking about people with dementia, with Alzheimer's, or accessibility issues like dyslexia. We're looking at people who are carers, who are rendered in difficult circumstances just by the fact that they are perhaps an unpaid carer. We're talking about people in coercive relationships, or we're talking about health issues like mental physical health. So it could be any combination of those things, huge range of things that we could classify as vulnerable. So how do we then pick all of that up and say, this is what you do in that circumstance? So we need to find some answers and need to start to move towards that. Next slide, please, Heidi. The whole regulatory landscape has shifted, certainly since I've been doing this, and we've moved perhaps from just having some high level guidance around vulnerability and we should do the right thing to something perhaps that's not entirely prescriptive, but it's starting to move there. And I think this is why we need to really sort of grasp the nettle now and start to really work out how we manage vulnerable customers if we haven't started to do already. So all sectors looking at it, probably maybe more specific around regulation is the Financial Conduct Authority. We saw Consumer Duty come into force last summer. And realistically, what Consumer Duty is, you need to look at your customer's circumstances throughout the customer life cycle, and that becomes even more important if that individual is in a vulnerable situation, because they are more likely to be susceptible to harm. So to identify vulnerability and to manage it in the right way is a massive tick in the box in terms of financial services. And they are looking at sharing data around vulnerability, and they issued a market study just before Christmas. I was delighted we were actually referenced in that as a model around data sharing and vulnerability, and around the importance of moving forward and sharing vulnerable data across the financial services sector. And surely that has to be a stepping stone into other sectors as well. Certainly the Department of Business and Trade, and we're talking to them, are looking at a central priority services register, whereby if you register as a vulnerable person with your energy company, with your water company, so you're treated as a priority in terms of if there's a flood, if there's an outage, then that should be shared across all of them. You shouldn't have to register with each one separately. And I think we're moving towards that. My grand vision, if you like, is that all of these things should be cohesive. They should work together. As far as the vulnerable individual is concerned, should they have to register with financial services? Should they have to register with energy? If they have a gaming issue, should they have to register there? Should they have to talk to government bodies about vulnerability if it relates to DWP or HMRC or local government, council tax, housing, rental, that side of things? Hopefully these things will all move together. And if we move on to the next slide, also we're having lots of conversations with central government around data sharing, certainly under the Digital Economy Act, which in relation to debt and fraud. We're also talking to the Home Office, because they are now looking at coming up with schemes around identifying vulnerability in terms of fraud. And I think we're only recently really seeing the link between fraud and vulnerability, even though it's quite obvious, I guess. People who are vulnerable are more susceptible to scams and fraud than perhaps others. We're seeing that link now. We're opening that whole new world out into looking at the two together as well. So that's the regulatory landscape. It's a big old world out there, and I think things are changing. I don't think doing the right thing in terms of treating our vulnerable customers in the right way is going to be a nice to have. It's going to be absolutely critical just from a reputational, just from a regulatory point of view. Data acquisition is difficult, and I guess if I've got one plea to you all out there, if you are sitting working directly with individuals who need to highlight vulnerability to their service providers, please come to us and talk to us, because building our database and having a robust database of people is one of the most important things out there. Our database is growing all the time. There is no central way of identifying vulnerability. There's tens of thousands of charities working out with people in specific circumstances. Lots of debt management companies working with people in financial difficulty. We've got 3 credit reference agencies working directly with individuals in relation to credit reports, but we are trying to gather all that data together. And again, I guess this is my vision of how it works and how we certainly started to make it work. We're engaged with every sector in terms of collating and sharing data now. But when you look at the private sector, people deal with financial services, insurance, gaming, telcos, you know, I could go on. Each of those customer interactions may actually highlight vulnerability that could be relevant to another sector or another service provider, and we see ourselves as a conduit to actually sharing that data and enabling organisations to deal with that. Regrettably, I don't have any sort of tangible facts and figures about what the exact business benefits of sharing data are, but we know that certainly anecdotally, what can be 5 telephone conversations with a customer can be reduced to 1 just by knowing their circumstances upfront. Engagement, because you know their circumstances and you're managing them, will increase. We all know when somebody's in debt, one of the hardest things is actually to get engagement with that individual. This encourages that. So not only those things, but clearly ticks in regulators' boxes by doing the right thing and then taking steps to identify and act upon vulnerability and avoiding negative PR as well. So we get data from those sectors. We're working with central and local government. We're working increasingly with credit reference agencies. We get data from debt management companies, which I think is very important based on the fact that if somebody's taken that significant step to start to manage their debt, then other organisations that aren't aware of that should be aware of that. We're working in terms of financial abuse. We work with the illegal money lending team to identify where people are victims of illegal money lending, because again, people falling under the regulated credit safety net is a real problem, and increasingly so further to cost of living impacts and the fallout from pandemic and all of that. We work with issues resolution companies. We hold data where individuals are deceased. We get a lot of deceased data from estate management companies. We work particularly with estate search. I'm not sure if anybody's on from estate search today, but often we get that deceased data in a more timely manner than it would land on a mortality file, and clearly deceased identities are very vulnerable, particularly to fraud. We work with lots of local authorities where we get quarter protection data, whereby individuals are not in a position to manage their own financial affairs. So the local authority manages them. Very often those people should not be doing things like going and getting credit extended to them. We hold that data. We can flag that up if somebody shouldn't be extended credit. We also hold power of attorney data, so I could flag up the fact that my mother is a vulnerable individual because I hold a power of attorney over her. There is no other central way of identifying where a power of attorney is in place. So that's the picture. That's how we share the data. Massive area, but we are getting there, I believe. So, Heidi. These are our flags. They are dynamic. We don't go into massive detail about each one, but we try and highlight the areas of vulnerability to give a flag, a heads up to organisations when they're dealing with them. And there are many. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier. And I guess that the objective of this webinar is, how do we deal with these things when we identify them, and what do we do with them? So I've tried to break it down, and on the next slide, you'll see I break it down essentially into 4 different areas. We know we have a handle on how to deal with people in financial difficulty, but very often those things go hand in hand with a series of other vulnerabilities. So I think we can break vulnerability down into largely 4 different categories: financial difficulty, life events such as bereavement. You know, you could be having a baby, it could be a divorce or a relationship breakdown. It can be temporary events. It could be health related, it could be physical health, it could be mental health that affects somebody, or it can be accessibility. But we can have an idea about how to break some of these things down and streamline how we manage these things without having to have 500 customer service staff floundering away trying to work out what to do in each event. So financial difficulty, obviously we have things like credit reference agencies to identify somebody's financial situations. We've now got open banking to give us even more detail about how we manage somebody. But we can also help people by identifying routes for them to actually help themselves. We can point them in the directions of debt management companies, the free debt management, charitable debt advice organisations. We can point them in the direction of how they assess whether they are getting everything they're entitled to in terms of discounts, in terms of benefits. There are lots of routes available to them that we can perhaps add on to our way of managing individuals. If somebody has a life event that's a temporary situation, if they're in arrears, we can manage the way we deal with them. If we know about it, if we are engaged with them, we can perhaps slow down the process of collecting money. We can work with them to identify when things are going to actually get better. We've never said that by flagging yourself as vulnerable is an actual get out of jail free card, but it does enable us to help people and support individuals as well. We also flag up, as I said earlier, if somebody should be declined credit. So that's clearly an action that needs taking straight away. If somebody's saying they should be declined credit, there's no point in doing lots and lots of checks. That individual has said they shouldn't be extended credit, and there is really no justification. It may simply be because they're not capable of managing their financial affairs. They may know they have an issue, and therefore they want to stop themselves going out and getting credit that they can't afford to repay. Similarly, we show where somebody else is acting on somebody else's behalf. So where there's a power of attorney in place, we can adjust the way we manage that relationship. Accessibility is straightforward. If somebody is telling us they've got limited technical ability, then there is no point in sending them down a digital route to communicate with them. If we know these things up front, we can quite simply adjust the way we communicate with them and make that future customer relationship far easier. And I'm not saying all of this is easy. If somebody is saying they've got a mental health issue or something like that, then it may be not that straightforward. There isn't going to be a formula to respond to that. And we may need to case manage certain instances where somebody's identified that they're vulnerable. But if we know what those are and we refer those out and manage those ones rather than spending our time when there's a simple solution, then I think this is going to be far more resource efficient than it would be by just having a whole list of various things that we just don't really know how to handle and where to start with. So if I can move on to the next slide. I just wanted to touch on this before I hand over to Kat. I just think it's really important. I'm really proud of what we've been involved in here, working with an organisation called Healthy Home Solutions. The first draft of this was sponsored by Cadent Gas. I think we've got Wales and West Utilities on the call today, who are launching their part of what we're doing here. I talked at the beginning about the fact that let's use data where we've identified vulnerable individuals to help them to help themselves, to empower them to get the support that they actually need without them floundering away and trying to find that. Our first sort of toe dipped in the water around this has identified the £42 million worth of social value around this, and it is very simple. If we go on to the next slide, what we are doing is we are using our data to identify individuals who are entitled to additional support, and they may not go and seek that themselves, but we can give them a stepping stone to allowing them to access that additional support. We know the individuals registered on our database are vulnerable. Are they entitled to be on the priority services register with a utility provider? Should they be on the telephone preference service? Are they entitled to things like carbon monoxide advice monitors? Are they entitled to discounts? Things like broadband social tariff discounts, there's only 10% of those that are actually currently access. 90% of them aren't accessed by individuals. Discounted social tariffs, even though we know that digital exclusion and financial exclusion go absolutely hand in hand. We're giving links out to confidential mental health support. We're linking out where appropriate to the Alzheimer's Society, to GamCare if somebody has a gambling issue. We are pointing out to debt management support and advice. We're working with Paid Plan at the moment on this. We are helping people check benefits calculators to identify whether they are entitled to additional benefits, because we know there are billions of pounds of unclaimed benefits that people aren't realising in the UK. So if they have access to further funding, then they can potentially help themselves out. This isn't an exhaustive list. There are, I mean, you've all got imaginations. You can imagine what we can do with this to identify different routes for people to help themselves. It can grow and grow and grow. And the more people that contribute to it and the more partners that partner with us on this, then the more successful it's going to be. So I just wanted to mention that. Any thoughts about it? Anybody wants to contribute? Anybody that's got any thoughts about anything I've said? We'll have time for questions at the end, but for the moment, I'll sign off. And as I say, I think what the National Support Network is doing is absolutely wonderful. I'm a little bit professionally jealous actually around it. So I will hand over to Kat. The one thing I would say on the back of this is we are working together on this, and I'll talk a little bit more at the end, but Kat's initiative is absolutely fantastic. So thank you. I think Kat wanted to share her own slides. Yeah, over to you if you're there.
Thanks, Helen. And you know, this morning I was on a call and they were talking about identifying vulnerable customers and the difficulties of it. So I think that your work is brilliant as well, obviously. That's the partnership. I'm in a state, so I just apologize for any kind of like bleary-eyed or like slurred speech on my end. That's the reason why. But yeah, I think that, you know, this is really personally important to me, connecting anyone who's struggling with any life issue to support. And the reason for that and why I started this initiative is because I've struggled to find help before. And I recognize how difficult it can be in a situation where you feel kind of hopeless and helpless and you can't find help. And you maybe go to Google and you get dragged down rabbit holes, or you call a helpline and then you get diverted onto another helpline and you kind of going around in circles. And it's honestly like, it's exhausting. And I personally want to help as many people as possible. So we're working in partnership with other organizations to support them in signposting their customers. And, you know, whether that's something that we can support yourselves with, or whether that's something that we can just give some pointers to, I'm really happy to be here and share any kind of learnings with anyone who's on the call. So I'll share my personal details as well, my personal email, so that you have that to hand. So what I'd like to speak with you about, just like 4 kind of different areas. The first one is around handling disclosures. I don't really like the word handling, which is a bit like the apostrophes at the other end. Also, I thought it'd be quite cool to do like a stop check on, or a kind of pulse check on, how would you rate your signposting against some of the criteria that we see are kind of key in determining what's maybe best practice? And then looking at, well, what could well-considered signposting look like? So this is kind of taking it beyond the kind of tick box exercise, like what could it look like and how could you kind of get there? And then we'll show you, I'll do a little demo of our support hub solution that we build out for companies. We do like co-branded websites, so I can show you that with our support hub directory in the back end, which kind of powers that. But as you mentioned, Helen, you know, vulnerability or customers in vulnerable circumstances is on the rise. My background's in risk management and finance, so I know this too well. And I think that, you know, the latest financial live survey by the FCA, it seemed at the headline level to identify that vulnerability was decreasing slightly. But actually, when you looked into the figures, the reason for that was driven by the increase in older populations being more digitally savvy or accessible, because of COVID and things like that, when in actual fact, you know, the number of people reporting poor health is up, number of people reporting negative life events is up. The number of people reporting low financial resilience is up. And I'm sure that a lot of you on the call, I can see, are from different sectors, different organizations. We don't need to kind of get into this or argue this or debate this. Post-COVID, cost of living, everything that's going on, times are so tough for a lot of people. So yeah, I think that this is really good timing, and hopefully I can help you a little bit in regards to the signposting. I do welcome questions in the chat or as you go along. When I'm at a webinar or whatever, kind of forget things as they come up. So feel free to like pop them in the chat and we can touch on them later on. And kind of going on to this first section then about handling disclosures again, I don't think like it's the right word for it. I worked in a contact center when I was at university, and I remember asking people, "Hi, how are you?" as an opener. And sometimes the majority of sometimes people would say, "Oh, hey, like, yeah, I'm good. Like, you know, sort this credit card, this other thing out for me, the savings account, you know." But actually a lot of the time people would say, "Not so good. Like, I've just been made redundant. Like, my landlord's kicking me out. I'm having to put my mum into care. Like, my dog's died." Like the most random things that you would think of. And I know that Helen's going to touch on this in her talk afterwards, because she works day in, day out with contact centres about how to have these, you know, empathetic connections with customers and kind of transform those interactions. But back in the day, and this is like way back in the day, and this was for, you know, one of the big banks back then, we didn't have training about what to do in those sorts of situations. And I think those that are attracted to a frontline role are naturally quite chatty. They want to help. And it can be really quite devastating to not know how to help and kind of a little bit awkward. You kind of say, "Well, sorry to hear that. How can I help you today?" Or you maybe want to offer personal advice. So if someone says that they struggle with something and you know someone that's been through something similar, you maybe jump on that and go, "Oh yeah, like my mum had that same thing and this is her story and this is what helped her." And actually, I think being on the front line, like, that could, not everyone's situation is the same, and the circumstances in which they experience their journey to that challenge or problem that they're facing, it's all completely different. Like, there's no one size fits all sort of solution or advice that's going to help. And so it can actually kind of lead to potentially more customer harm doing that sort of thing. But it's completely understandable. So there's a lot of protocols or processes that people have thought of to deal with those sorts of things. And now there is training in a lot of organizations and on how to kind of deal with those disclosures. So when a customer opens up and tells you something. I also just want to touch on as well that those disclosures are coming from a place of, you know, customer feeling a little bit of fear and hope, the fear that will I be listened to? Will they care? Will they understand? I'm kind of warming myself up in it, sharing this. But then also like the hope that maybe there's something that the advisor can do to help, something. So I think that that's the real kind of like human element to it. But yeah, this is an example of one of the protocols that some staff are trained in, like the Texas protocol. And you thank the customer for, you know, for sharing that. You then kind of explain how you can help, and you ask for explicit consent to use that information. You ask some more questions around their situation, and then you signpost to internal or external services that can maybe support or help that customer. And I think that, well, from working with different organizations and speaking with lots of organizations on this, that signposting element is something that historically has been, you know, oh, you're facing a mental health issue, speak to Samaritans. You have a cancer diagnosis, speak to Macmillan. You've lost someone, speak to Crew's Bereavement Care. And they have maybe like a defined list of services that they maybe refer to. But I think that there's so much more that can be done that can, again, help individuals who have very unique circumstances, needs and preferences to the type of support that they want to engage with. And so, you know, with this kind of signposting pulse check, I'll take you through this. The four different criteria, I think, that might be worth reflecting on your own organisations are around quality, scope, variety, and how embedded it is. You don't need to like put your scores in the chat, you can if you want, but it's more for something for yourself to kind of reflect on. And this is built on based on a lot of conversations that I've had with different organisations over the past, few months, like setting up national support networking in the work. And so in terms of quality, this is relating to the quality of information that's shared and the quality of services that are referred to. Spoken with organisations that the kind of that are more like, okay, well, actually we have the spreadsheet in-house. We add to it now and again whenever something comes up, and it's started as something small, but now it's maybe grown arms and legs and it's a little bit unorganized. And then you look at other organizations and they have on their website, maybe a list of 3 or, one or a few charities that can maybe help people, but they don't provide any context around, well, actually, what could that service do for me as an individual, as a customer? So I think that that's the more kind of basic level. It can also include partnerships, where a lot of organizations have partnerships with specific charities that they refer to for particular causes that are maybe important to them, maybe because of staff have experience in that area, or other kind of criteria. So kidney cancer care or something else, they maybe have partnerships there, so they signpost to those specific ones. The other organisations maybe update this list or their directories more often, more frequently. It's actually a defined role within the organisation. It's someone's job to do this because the support landscape changes so often. We see charities merging, changing helplines. It's a moving environment. And so actually keeping on top of that and keeping that up to date, it needs to be a defined role. It needs to be a defined role. The amount of organisations that I've worked with and, help do some research, and you go to their websites where they maybe have a list of the different organisations that can support people. When you click on the links and it lands in 404 errors or broken links, I know from my own experience and from speaking with others and working with others that if someone's in crisis or, is facing a difficult circumstance and they land on a 404 error or something else, it can be enough to set them back in their journey to support, to ultimately manage or resolve their issue. So keeping all of that up to date is very important. And also in terms of the quality standards, what services are you signposting to? Is it an app that you've heard, oh, that app's good? Have you actually looked at the reviews? Have you looked at when it was last updated? Is it actually a good self-help app that you can promote? There's lots, we have a whole data quality strategy and processes and controls in place, and I'd be happy to kind of share and explore a little bit more about that as well if it's of interest. The next section is about scope. So I kind of touched on this earlier, where there are maybe, it's the scope of the problems that are covered. So a lot of things can happen in someone's life. Are you covering the major health conditions, mental health, and other things? Or are you going beyond it and taking more of a holistic sort of whole person approach? Because a lot of times someone who's maybe facing a problem at work that can then impact their relationships at home, can then impact their physical health, it can then impact their mental health. We see that all these things are connected. So what kind of approach do you think is right to take? I personally would go on the edge, like I'm more in the field of provide a holistic kind of whole person approach to your signposting, because that's ultimately what's going to deliver the most value for your customers and help them. The next is on the variety of support services that are available. So again, like it's great and fantastic to signpost to any organization and to try and help people. But for a lot of people, they maybe don't want to call a helpline, or they maybe don't want to, listen to a podcast or download an app. Like everyone's different in how they want to engage with services. And I think as well, how people engage with services, there's a lot from the past few years and working with hundreds of people across the UK and pulling together this massive directory that we have support services. There are so many niche support services to help people who have, unique needs and preferences of how they want to engage with support, but there's also niche support services for particular demographics or cultural circumstances. How I experience loss is going to be very different to someone else of a different faith or cultural background. How I experience loss, how I experience abuse is going to look different because of my gender or age and something else. And so you see that actually there's such a variety of specific support services out there that can really get to the nub and help people based on their own experience, that I think there's an opportunity here to help them be discovered. And then it's about embedding that signposting piece. So back, from my own experience, I wasn't trained. I wasn't told that there was any sort of where to point people. Hopefully, things, and I can hear and see that things have moved on a little bit more, but do the frontline staff feel confident and equipped, not only that they know that this exists, but actually how to have those conversations? And I know Helen's going to explore this with you a little bit further, but how do they, again, I hate the word hands-on disclosures, but how do they engage with the customer in a way that shows like genuine care and empathy? And how do they kind of come away from that feeling like they've been able to meaningfully help, so they're not, taking the problems home with them after they finish their shift? So it's about embedding it also across different comms processes as well. I was on a call earlier and they were talking about, sending out text to customers and different customer comms and letters and alerts and things like this, identifying what are the different triggers and points in the customer journey where you can flag, listen, there's support available if you're struggling. I think that that's so valuable, and that continual reminder that there is help available for anyone out there that's struggling. So yeah, so well considered signposting, just touching on these 4 pieces briefly. Quality is about providing clear, up-to-date information and quality services. It's about the scope, so helping them find support for any problem, again, taking a holistic or whole person approach. It's about the variety, so displaying services that reflect the diversity of your customer base. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, so let's show them what's on the offer so that we can improve and help them be more likely to take the support that's available. And then embeddedness, so kind of making the frontline staff kind of feel like the superheroes in the journey, and helping them connect with support services. Helping the customer connect with support services. So our support hub solution, I know Experian have come out with a product that has the same name, but we had this first. Our support hub solution, it's a directory containing information and thousands of different support services available at national level across England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. It's something that we've been building over the past few years, involving hundreds of people in our work. I will take you through a product demo so you can get a sense for the types of services that we share here and what this kind of practically looks like. So for companies, we build co-branded websites, or we supply widgets, which is like a kind of copy paste of some code, which embeds that on their own websites and apps and things like this. But at the heart of it, like in the background, is the support hub directory, which is continually maintained and updated, that contains all the information, all the different services. This is an example of the co-branded website that we would create. So for companies, they can have their logo up the top left, and there's also a space for sharing information about customer vulnerability teams or customer care teams or other partnerships that they have in place or preferred services that they want to signpost people to. How it works, it's a problem-based search, because a lot of people who are looking for support, they maybe have an idea what problem they're facing, but they don't know what support's available. So we kind of frame this as almost like a discovery platform. It's a place where people can come to discover what support's available. And as they're typing in problems like trouble sleeping or diabetes, there's different ideas or different suggestions that will come up. I don't know why I'm going for trouble sleeping, probably because it's like 3 a.m. here. But here are a range of different support services that we've vetted and added and provided clear information about what these support services do. Did you know that there are sleep charities? They are a thing. So I think that there's just such a massive variety of support out there, and using this, your customers are able to find support that specifically helps them. We cover over 1,000 different topics. We went through a really lengthy and meaningful exercise with subject matter experts in each of these different areas and mapped out over 1,000 different problems. So everything from mental health, money, relationships, family, work, housing, loss. What else have we got here? Crime, pets, and also further supports for particular groups who are in need of help. When you go into one of these, then it kind of breaks it down into different categories. You can see that for abusive relationships, rather than just highlighting a couple of the organisations, we take it down to the next level and we say, actually, do you want to help? Do you want to check your partner's history of abuse? It's a service that not a lot of people know that are available to them. It's all the way through to support for abusers to stop, because there are services for that too. And then specific services for different types of abuse that people are facing, or the stage that they're at in their journey. So if you go into like this as an example, this is quite a good example for actually getting to the nub of, well, actually, what type of support do you want? Whereabouts are you based? What kind of support do you want? Are you looking for a helpline or an app or something else? In terms of the format, do you want something that's over the phone or online? Because everyone's going to engage with support differently. But then also, do you want support that's specifically designed for you? So whether that's, for young people, for older people, for men, women, ethnic minorities, LGBTQ, like you can apply these filters and then very quickly find the support services that are available to those individuals in those individual groups. So that's an example of our support hub website that we build for companies to help their customers find support. We defined the URL, which is unique to each organization that we work with, which then can be shared wherever, whenever, whether that's on the front line or through customer comms. There's no login. We don't want to make it difficult. We want to encourage people to go to the site and to find help very quickly and easily. Another really interesting thing as well is on the back end, we can see the analytics. So we can actually share new insights. Sorry, I'm just going to stop the share. So you can actually see the insights and the trends of what problems people are facing. And that can lead to new discoveries. So for example, like we're working with a couple of colleges and universities, and we're seeing that a lot of young students are struggling with housing. And that was on homelessness services. So that was really interesting for them, and then means that they're going to now look to create new partnerships or make changes in their strategies so that they can better support those organizations, their students. I'm just going to come back to the slides quickly before I wrap up. So yeah, so that's a little bit about Support Hub and the services that we deliver. We are working with a number of organizations. We are looking to expand this because I want every person to have access to this. I think that it's too much to kind of take the gamble to look down on Google. And I think that there's such a range of different support services out there. I'm so passionate about trying to help people find the support that they need when they need it. So I'd love to welcome a conversation. So we've touched on handling disclosures and kind of what signposting looks like, and a little bit about our solution. If you go to our website, you can sign up for a free trial, so you can have a play around yourself and have a little look at that. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, and welcome questions either now or later on, Helen, depending on what you prefer.
Yeah, no, if anybody's got any questions at all, if they want to put their hand up. I mean, I think my reaction is always, why wouldn't you use it? That's got to have something for absolutely everybody, whether it's your customers, whether it's you, whether it's your staff. It's just a fantastic resource, and I love it. I think one of the way I see it working in terms of what VRS does is we identify types of vulnerability. We feed into into the National Support Network, and that offers you a resource in terms of how you can help those customers. So there is a streamlined solution. But on top of that, I mean, this works in any environment. So you take us out of the equation, as Kat says, she wants everybody to, and I think they probably should. So are there any questions at all? I don't know if you want to stick your virtual hand up at all, or stick them in the chat, or we'll probably have a couple of moments at the end as well. If not, can't see anything. Okay, well, thank you ever so much, Kat. I'll pass over to Helen now. As I say, training is more and more critical in terms of equipping our teams, our staff, ourselves, I guess, to manage difficult conversations, difficult people. I mean, it's all relatively new. I worked in an environment where we dealt with thousands of calls a day, where most of the people were struggling with financial difficulty years ago, and I don't think it ever crossed our minds to worry about somebody's circumstances or whether they were vulnerable or what they were vulnerable to. It's still a new thing, and we need to really learn how to manage that. I think we're all still learning. So I'll pass over to Helen now, and again, if there's any questions.
You just popped on mute there, Helen.
So I was passing over to you. So
All right, no worries. Okay,
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as you can all see, hello, I am Helen Beaumont Manahan. You can't really see that on my long name. And the organisation that doesn't quite fit on the Zoom screen is BPA Quality. So we're a global provider of managed QA services, specialised customer contact training and QA software for a range of clients in many different industries all around the world, lots of different languages, and we've been doing it for over 30 years. And like Helen said, we've seen an absolute tsunami of requests over recent years to really leverage what we know about showing up for customers who might be in tricky, difficult, or vulnerable circumstances. Just like Helen, I'm going to put that disclaimer out there. If I say vulnerable customers, I do appreciate that vulnerability might be an aspect of someone's life, but it's never the whole person. I just want to, bring that forward now. But we do all know what we mean when we talk about vulnerable customers. So following on them from what Helen and Kat have shared, and brilliant, really, they've beautifully outlined the what. Let's just talk a little bit, quite granular, I suppose, in a way, around the how. So we're talking about empathy in challenging circumstances, specifically coaching our frontline customer service team members. And I think the reason that the emotional intelligence skill set, and by extension, I suppose, empathy, prevails even in the face of what is, well, certainly from my side of the fence, it's a frenzy around all things digital transformation and anything AI flavored. It's because we know on an intuitive level, on that human level, that it does really matter. And we know tuning in to what our customers are sharing and getting a feel for what they're experiencing definitely takes effort, but we also know that the payoff's worth it, not just for the customers themselves and for our organizations for sure, but also, as Kat mentioned, for us in role as well. If we get better at this, we're able to just, have that sense of a job well done, because it is a hard job. So often we already know what to do, but we don't always do what we know. And there are lots of through lines in what Helen and Kat have shared already when we do seek to kind of improve our response to all things around vulnerability. Like Helen said, absolutely vast subject. Empathy is, certainly in my view, and it's hardly controversial, an integral part of getting it right. So where are we going to focus on what is a huge topic then? Well, firstly, let's get really clear on what empathy is. We want to set the scene on why it's so important for our customers, but particularly those either in crisis or having a tricky time for whatever reason. And so we want to be thinking about boosting our empathetic response for all our customers. But in order to do that, we've got to think about what the blocks might be getting in our way. And then crucially, how we might overcome them. And again, we're not going to, boil the ocean today, but I really do hope that this will be interesting and useful. So welcome on the journey. And let's kick off then by just reflecting on what is a key coaching question, really, which is, are we supporting our team to support our customers? How are we doing for our customers with characteristics of vulnerability? Do we help or hinder them when they come into contact with our business, our organization, and they experience the level of service we provide? We might frame that as a moment of truth. But what is it like to be a customer of our organization when we are experiencing those times of challenge like Kat outlined, and what's getting in our way? So this is probably rhetorical. Just to start by thinking, is our intent and our operational reality aligned, and how might empathy help us in that? So I do have a poll, and I think my lovely blushing assistant Heidi's going to launch this poll for us. Please, Heidi. It's just a scaling activity. You can see there it's how confident do we currently feel in our team's ability to show up and support our customers when they are experiencing vulnerable circumstances. So scaling from 1, we're beginners, we're setting out, frankly, we get this wrong often, through to around a 5, which is, generally okay, but there's always room to learn, room for improvement and to level up, right up to a 10, which is, we are smashing it out of the park. We are a team of expert ninja. We never miss in our response to vulnerability. So just invite you to consider where you are and maybe place a little answer in there. And regardless of where you placed your organisation on the scale today, as you reflected in on that question, I hope that it's a useful opportunity just to think about why you gave the score you did. And maybe over the course of our conversation, we'll be thinking about what might help us to move up the scale, because simple, not easy is really the message for today. So thank you for those of you that have contributed. I think Heidi can leave that poll open in case you want to, if you're a reflector and you want to, take some time before you give a considered response. That's absolutely great. And again, just for the purposes of kind of framing the discussion around effective coaching approaches, you have to pin vulnerability around a definition, I suppose. And there are several out there. The wording does vary a little bit, as you'll know, potentially between regulators. But in my humble opinion, we could do a lot worse than use this from the FCA, which defines a vulnerable customer as someone who, due to their personal circumstances, is especially susceptible to harm, particularly when a firm is not acting with appropriate levels of care. And you may well know that, you may have it kind of tattooed on your eyeballs, depending on where you work and what you do. But what I find really useful in this definition is the calling out that vulnerability is not solely about the circumstances of that individual. It's also about the actions that we take as a business when they come into contact with us and they experience the level of service that we provide. So we have to be considering how we impact the customer through our actions and the way we show up. So we start with the definition like this to frame the topic. It's clearly going to be useful, but it really is just the beginning. And so while this isn't going to be about, unpacking all the possible drivers and characteristics of vulnerability, as Helen did outline those at the beginning, we can acknowledge that vulnerability takes many forms. It can be permanent, temporary, or fluctuating. Thank you so much. I'm looking at those results coming in, and we've got quite a big, not a swing, but an even distribution curve there. The majority of people seeking, in that kind of learn it all rather than a know it all stance, to think, what could we do to do better? So we're, our intent is good. Is it fully aligned with our operational reality? And sadly, historically, then we know that when people are in tricky circumstances, we are less likely to be able to advocate for ourselves or to get our needs met than that, typical consumer, whatever a typical consumer is. We might not know what to say, what to do, quite where to turn. And that can increase the likelihood of us giving up, like Kat said, maybe falling through the cracks of a complaint process or issue resolution workflows, or just trying to, find some support. And ultimately, that translates to experiencing poorer outcomes often. So vulnerability might also make us more susceptible to acting in ways that are not in our best interest. And that can be due to behavioral biases, maybe comprehension issues. And that can, of course, affect the decisions we make. I know that we know this, it's not new news, but how we spot the signs and signals of vulnerability and then respond is really important to kind of making things better for everyone. So just quickly then, why now? And Kat's mentioned this. So why is vulnerability so front of mind for so many organizations currently? Hot topic doesn't feel like hyperbole to say. So yes, we have things like the consumer duty in financial services that is definitely driving, and rightly so, increased focus. But there is also this growing kind of wider acknowledgement, almost like cultural mood music, that we need to do better. There's work to be done. There's been many a headline. I'm sure you've seen them to this effect over the past few years. And often that translates into regulatory pounds and pence. But really, it's about doing the right thing and showing we care because we care. So there's a lot going on that's showing us all loud and clear that it is time to level up our response. Honourable mention here then to the Collins Dictionary of the Word for 2022, which was permacrisis. And so if we want to really, I keep saying show up, but if we really want to be there for our customers and our teams when they need us, we've got to really acknowledge and deeply connect with our current lived experience as humans. So we're post-global pandemic now. We're all living through a lot of turbulence. There's living costs, inflation rates going up, complicated geopolitical picture. We've got war in Europe, conflict. God, I'm really painting a sad picture today, aren't I? It's an election year. More than half of the planet, so some 50 countries are heading to the polls this year. And all of these wider circumstances can and do impact on the way that we and our customers feel day to day. And these bleed into the types of issues, the emotions, the expectations that our customers are bringing to us. And if you add AI and rising automation in the name of digital transformation, we also see significant disruption at quite a bewildering rate in the tech space. And that is leaving some of us behind and potentially excluded. So now more than ever, I've set out my stall. It's hardly a hard sell. Customers are experiencing this range of challenging circumstances, and so are we. So characteristics of vulnerability then often, like Helen mentioned, grouped into those 4 key drivers of health, life events, resilience, be it financial or emotional, capability. And there are some examples of each of those represented here in these quite colourful tiles. And all of these kind of circumstances that life can deal us might be okay for us in isolation, but we've got to hold these things in our awareness, because that can help us to be mindful of when that tipping point comes, when we or our customers get dealt one card, one circumstance too many by life, and then those circumstances may crystallize into impact or harm. So all consumers are at a risk of harm then. The risk is definitely increased. We know that if those vulnerable circumstances are present, and that's important because currently, as Kat referenced in the most recent Financial Lives survey, the FCA said or told us that almost half of our adult population, so 25 million of us there or thereabouts, show at least one of these characteristics of vulnerability. And like Kat did mention, that figure is ostensibly down from previous surveys, but as we've seen in the ways that matter, actually these circumstances are more of a pressing issue, potentially, arguably, now than in recent times. And it goes without saying that our customers are bringing these challenging circumstances, these differentiated needs to our agents. And then, by the way, these agents are the ones that are tasked more and more frequently with really complex, high emotion situations. We've got automation, self-serve options, deflecting more routine interactions. They're doing some more heavy lifting for lots of us, but we have to be mindful that this can lead to stress, to burnout, and that dreaded empathy fatigue in our advisors. And it's their job to be in service, and we're doing them a disservice if we're not acknowledging this and supporting them too. And coaching is a really great place to start. I truly believe that. And it bears repeating that we talk about customer vulnerabilities, vulnerable customers, but our people are, of course, facing the same pressures that we've outlined, and they are still expected to show up for customers, even though they may be potentially experiencing very similar circumstances, the same characteristics, or certainly knowing or supporting someone else who does and is. So it cuts both ways. Customers do run the risk of dehumanizing our advisors because they simply can't see how hard the job is. And we have studies like this one, for example, which is highlighting the substantial number of consumers that are prone to becoming angry and upset when interacting with a human advisor over the past year. This is a European stat, and I know you can support any kind of argument you choose really with the right statistics, but I think this is really telling that over half have reported that feeling of anger. And in the States, a similar study looked at customer rage, and again, it's over half. And similar research also told us recently that the UK customers rank almost lowest in satisfaction with the kind of level of agent empathy, some 54% saying that we're kind of like languishing down there in the bottom, with just over half of respondents saying that their agent's level of empathy was either completely or somewhat satisfactory, which of course leaves that blank space of almost half not satisfied, at least to some degree. So there's a lot going on, and we've outlined some of the reasons why, but let's not pass up this chance here to conduct our own poll together in this webinar. Let's gauge our impressions on the state of empathy. And Heidi, I think we've got a poll there. So in our advisor population, has empathy improved, worsened, or stayed the same compared with 12 months ago? And again, it would be lovely if you would be willing to kind of, reflect and share your own view on that as experts in your, certainly experts in your organization, because it's always quite instructive, I think, just to have the opportunity. And we can do this this exercise internally as well, which can be quite helpful when we're thinking about tailoring our coaching approach. Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll leave that one running for a little while and see what comes up. So these kind of exercises then, certainly, and I'm curious to see what we've all said when the schools are on the doors, but they definitely tell us that many customers aren't feeling a satisfactory level of empathy, an empathetic response in a kind of response to their queries and their concerns. So let's put our customer hats on for a minute and again, just reflect on what is at stake here. When we're customers, particularly when we're challenged, how does it feel when empathy just isn't there? And we love to unpack this with frontline team members, but here's just one answer to that question we can see here. This is from Billy. Billy was one of the respondents of that 2022 FCA Financial Lives survey. He struggled to get appropriate service, I think, from his mortgage provider, even though he is recognised as a vulnerable consumer due to mental health issues. And in his own words, as we can read here, he said, "I feel really, really let down, a complete lack of empathy, unprofessional. It's incredibly frustrating." So we know when things are tough, how we show up with empathy, empathetic support is at the heart of the expectations for delivering better outcomes for all of our customers. And Billy's story is sadly no means an outlier for sure. And all of that could be really disheartening. And we certainly know that vulnerability can feel massively overwhelming to our team members who just want to know where to start and what to do. So we always want to remind them that there is so much we can do, and I know that Kat and Helen have a message of hope here, that as we kind of join the dots and really have a more cohesive approach, we can be there. And we might, the word that was coming to me was customer effort. We want to reduce customer effort for everyone, but how great would it be if we could be there for our customers when they are distressed or in challenging circumstances? So customers in vulnerable circumstances, they've got that risk of poor outcomes, which naturally doesn't feel great for our team members who are very aware of this, but we want to give the message to them and to, well, all of us, that this is rarely inevitable. Those poorer outcomes are rarely inevitable. I believe that. So, we want to be thinking about how we upskill our teams with practical tools, just like Kat showed us, and the way that they can help, and just empower people, take the time to listen. So we talked about intent and operational reality. Are we giving our team members the time to have the conversations, the training they need to spot the signs and signals, ask really great questions, and then have that courage to really lean in with empathy, have the conversations that matter, engage with customers, just let them know that help may be available. And so really a hopeful message. There is so much we can do. I truly believe that. And we shouldn't be afraid to be champions for vulnerability, be proactive and have conversations. So lots there. I'm talking a lot, but let's kind of just distill this. There's loads of useful support models out there. Kat showed us Texas earlier, which is possibly one of the most well-known, and it's great for signposting, but as well as support models and frameworks that can help us to navigate these conversations, or certainly the starting point for managing conversations in a sensitive and fair and compliant way. One of the things that really is resonating in the conversations that we have, the workshops that we hold, even in this world that's seemingly awash with and frankly dazzled by all things AI and digital at the moment, is this concept of making space for grace. Because all customers want to know, am I through to the right place? Does this person understand my issue? Are they willing to help me? Or we can just distill it even further. Do I matter? Do they care? And it's true for any customer, but particularly important for those in times of challenge, those with characteristics of vulnerability who are having a tricky time. So really stepping up and letting them know that they matter and we care starts with, from a coaching perspective, I truly believe, teaching or coaching or enabling our team members to make this bit of space for grace. So how can we cultivate more space for grace? And we've got a lovely picture there of, two people having a lovely hug, and we know all about those lovely fluffy feels. Well, we can start by delivering on the human element through empathy. So the single most important thing potentially that we can coach our team members to do when a customer is experiencing tricky circumstances, alongside giving more time, is showing empathy, that human connection. We want to be, I think, Kat, you mentioned fear and hope. So to really acknowledge that fear and hope and address it. And empathy often gets defined, there are lots of definitions, but the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. And when it comes to empathy for our advisor population, it's really at its core, it's about non-judgment and perspective taking. So it's absolutely key to doing the right thing for all of our customers, particularly, I would submit, when vulnerability is present. And you'll often hear me say, shouting into the void sometimes, if we do the right thing for our vulnerable customers, we are doing the right thing for all of our customers. So it really is in our best interest to, really think about our direction of travel and what we're doing, because empathy is an active doing. It's an integral part of customer service. It's on, most evaluation scorecards that you'll see will have empathy, maybe empathy with, dressed up with different pajamas on, but we know it when we experience it. And also we've seen, we feel its absence. And when we listen non-judgmentally to another person, share their situation, and then potentially how they feel about it, if we're truly listening, there's this kind of automatic shift in attitude, because we kind of lower our own defenses then, and we are listening non-defensively. So it's about seeking to understand that customer's position, accept their right to their own thoughts and beliefs, even if we, don't agree with them. If we were thinking and believing what they're thinking and believing in that moment, we would feel and act just the way they do. So this is a kind of in here when it comes to coaching and the approach that we can take. And could a greater miracle take place than for us to look through another's eyes for an instant? So that's a quote that to me speaks volumes. I know everybody's appetite for quotes can be different. We are not advocating peppy slogans here, toxic positivity. This goes deeper. And this quote to me speaks to a deeper truth, which is there is something truly wonderful at play. He calls it a miracle when we can do the work, and it can be work of getting better at empathy, seeking to understand another person, looking through their eyes for that instant, staying out of judgment, and accepting that they have their own thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and emotions. So we believe it's always possible to bring forward our empathy. Kat mentioned that, often people in frontline roles are quite chatty. In our experience, not always. Some people will tell us, I'm just not wired for empathy, or I haven't had that experience, so I can't relate. It sounds very different depending on the individual customer, naturally the individual advisor, and the nature of the contact. But it's never more important than when somebody's in vulnerable circumstances, to let them know, that message, hey, you matter, we care. Can be quite hard for us to lean in and bring our empathy forward when a customer is venting or angry. But we'd always say, in that moment, it could be helpful to reframe that angry customer as potentially a vulnerable customer. And so part of our emotional intelligence is having the awareness to manage that relationship at the same time as noticing and maybe seeking to balance what our own emotional response might be. So there can be other factors in the mix, like neurodiversity, and that's why it's really important to personalize coaching and training. And learning to get better at these skills is available to everybody. I firmly believe that. It's not something that simply happens. Some of us are naturally, more tuned in, sure, and practice definitely helps. So some people, right out of the gates, they can really kind of, show empathy from an early age. And then sometimes, as I mentioned, you've got those more tenured team members who might just say, I hear other people saying it just doesn't sound genuine. It's just not who I am. And then we get younger agents or, fresh ones who can struggle because they simply haven't had that life experience. They don't have the frame of reference to do the perspective taking piece well yet. But that can be true regardless of age. So age does not automatically confer these skills to us. I've heard it compared to swimming, often we learn to swim. So adults who can swim don't just magically get that skill with age, they learn it. And often, particularly those who are really great swimmers, those who have the best technique were taught and potentially coached, and then they practice or not. And it is the same with our communication skills and building our empathy muscles. So empathy then, simple to say, not easy to deliver. It is effortful. And I really want to acknowledge that. So we can also acknowledge that it's not just about being nice or fluffy, or not just about, I would submit, it isn't about being nice and fluffy. It's about becoming empathetic problem solving. And there is, I'm not going to dwell on this here. There is a lot that underpins good practice around delivering empathy, in our opinion, in our view, which is why personally I find it really reductive to call them soft skills. It was Seth Godin, I think, who said these are real skills. So IQ, our intelligence quotient might get you through school, but EQ, our emotional intelligence quotient, is what gets you through life and through your relationship. So expanding our EQ skills of awareness, positive management of our relationships can really help our advisors to adopt a more curious, empathetic, and ultimately a more productive stance that's going to help the customers. So question then, what do we do in the coaching and training space? And there's lots we can do. Coaching our team members around empathy really, in our view, starts with self. This is personal work. So we ask individuals, what gets in the way for you? When you choose, or maybe not quite consciously, but when you notice you're not fully leaning in, but maybe you're tempted to fall back on process, be transactional, instead of making that human connection, what is blocking you there? It's different for everyone, but there are common threads. And hey, guess what? There are a lot of common threads. This isn't even an exhaustive list. Okay, things like, I simply don't have time. My stats are going to suffer. My supervisor is going to be angry that I took so long, or I've heard all this before, or they should have paid their bill. All these things that we might be thinking, all these different scripts that we might not even be conscious of at the time. The reasons why we may decide in that moment that we're going to just be transactional, keep our tone low, lean back on process, and get that person through the call. And often it's not because we don't want to, it's because we simply don't feel confident about what to do. So it's really important when coaching to bring clarity and confidence to team members. And it starts with identifying and overcoming these kind of personal scripts that get in the way. This is kind of the antidote really to all of this. What do I do? What do I say in the moment? Is our mindset. And again, mindset is a huge, topic that we could talk about for a long time, but there are lots of things that we can say to acknowledge and reassure our customer, quite granular, explicit empathy statements, tick. Thank you very much for sharing this with me. You did the right thing to get in touch today, or, you're through to the right place. No rush. Let's take our time. We can go through some options together. I can really hear how much this matters to you. That does sound difficult. I'll be happy to help you today. Loads of scripts we can say. But like Kat said, if somebody's making a disclosure, we want to be thanking them with words that match our tone for sharing the information. And we want to do that by checking our mindset first. Can we be open, non-judgmental, curious? Can we convey with our words and our tone and our presence that we are with them, we are listening, even when that customer is agitated or upset? So people do get stuck on what's the exact right thing to say here, what's the script? And of course, some things are better to say than others when somebody's struggling or in distress, but mindset really does come first. And here's the thing, we don't have to agree with a customer to show empathy. It really starts with noticing our own feelings, what's coming up for us, and then consciously, and dare I say, sometimes quite effortfully, putting those feelings aside and truly listening. So we might not agree, but we can practice staying out of judgment, opening our minds, opening our ears, acknowledging to ourselves that customer has a right to their feelings, listening well, assuming good intent on the part of that customer. And all of that eventually, when we practice, makes it easier for us to kind of validate any emotions and be empathetic problem solvers. I love that phrase. So we might not agree with them, but we can think they are taking this really hard. This really matters to them. And my job here is to show up. So when we feel challenged by empathy, we might get stuck in thinking, as I said, I need the right script. I need to know exactly what to say. So it can be helpful to take that back and think, am I in a we and not a me mindset? So we can boost empathy when we really reflect on, are we putting a mental fence up? Are we taking an adversarial kind of stance? It's me against them. Or are we just kicking down at that mental fence? Are we taking a collaborative partnering stance where there's no mental divide and we're envisaging kind of tackling that problem with the customer? Because when I'm in that me versus you mindset, or when I'm in a me and you versus the problem mindset, I'm going to bring totally different Helen forward. And you know, that does bring totally different results. So just a word on mindset. And to connect with our customers who are going through tough times, we need to remember those smarts and hearts, so that IQ and that EQ. So we want to be leading with the hearts and then going in for the smarts. So we acknowledge that human element, that space for grace. First heart, first we address the feeling states, the challenge, the specific circumstances. We let them know with our tone and our words that they matter and we care. And then they're going to be more willing to want to problem solve with us. When they feel heard and acknowledged, that's when they're going to engage, and we're going to have more productive, more positive, more reassuring interaction. So this is a reminder as leaders and coaches that first heart and then head is really a shortcut that we can take. And again, it's easier for some than others, but it is possible, we believe, for everybody. And that's the beauty of coaching. Also, it's about making sure that we are checking our mindset is one of response rather than reaction. Empathy is truly offered without judgment. And we want to always remember that we can access that power of the pause. So in moments of challenge, if there's conflict or tension, or we're uncertain, we can check our mindset and we can ask, what is my best intention here? Is what I am about to say aligned with that best intention? You know, is it helpful? And that gives us the moment that we might need to respond, to choose our response rather than to react. So we know if customers don't feel that from us, they're going to be restating their issue throughout the contact. And there are lots of behaviors available to us that we can help to coach with our frontline team members, but also it's, you know, these are life skills that are great for us as managers as well, that can help us to show empathy. But no surprises, first and foremost, we would always submit that empathy starts with listening. And there are all kinds of models we can use to coach team members to listen well. We never want to be patronizing. You know, we all know we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, but there are models like this where we can really double click on how it is to be empathetically, non-judgmentally listening to our customers, and how are we behaving in those times. And again, you know, like, let's play bingo. If we want to summarize, there are a wealth of things, too many to talk about in 30 minutes, as I'm discovering now, to try in coaching, to questions to ask in coaching, to help our individual team members to boost their empathy and their empathetic response. It really does start with us, whoever we are. And, you know, just to uncomplicate it, we can distill all of those things down into letting our team members know that the most important thing we can do, as well as taking time and listening well, is to make sure our customers are aware that they matter to us and we care. And I just wanted to finish on a reminder that we can talk about empathy and how we boost our empathy and all of that, but we want a reminder that we want to start with compassion for ourselves and for our team members, this focus on our own self-care. We can't pour from an empty cup. When we can really give meaningful support, and then we have the confidence we're doing the right thing with things like the National Support Network, for example, then we are hopefully left holding much less at the end of our shift, much less at the end of our days, and we're more able, more routinely, to feel like we're being able to be those empathetic problem solvers in role. But we also need to keep one eye on, how am I feeling? How am I showing up? What do I need? And supporting each other through it. So final slide then. I hope this hasn't been death by PowerPoint. I could literally talk about this for, quite literally days, but just a quick kind of practical checklist then. So when we're coaching, make sure are we taking our time? Are we noticing what's going on for us and seeking to balance that? Are we cultivating that mindset, that partnership, so that we and not me, collaborative rather than adversarial? Are we setting our intention? What is my best intention here? Am I in service? Am I committing to taking the customer's perspective here? Are we listening attentively, checking our understanding, putting our judgments aside, judgment-free zone, as we can switch that light on in our minds, demonstrating empathy through our tone and our words? This person's got a right to their feelings and experiences, even if they don't match our own, and then ultimately reassuring the customer that help is available. And we've seen some practical ways that we might even be able to deliver and signpost that person effectively to that help. So very high level contours about the kind of ways that we can all get better at coaching empathy for our team members. And we want to recognize what a hard job that they do. And just welcome any questions, and always here to nerd out about anything to do with upskilling frontline team members in delivering on empathy and the wider emotional intelligence skill set with our customers. So thank you for your attention, and I hope there's been something of use here for you.
Thank you, Helen. That's fantastic. If anybody's got any questions at all for Helen, or indeed anyone else, if you want to raise a virtual hand and let us know, or just shout. I think that sort of the empathy thing can be massively underestimated. It's probably the strongest tool we've got in our armory, and it sounds so obvious, but it's easy to forget when we're in sort of corporate world where different set of rules and procedures, and you set yourself aside from it. But I mean, we all have stories to tell, and we've been that person sitting at the end of a call queue swearing and wanting to kill somebody. So, and we've all, and if we haven't sort of been we've got parents, grandparents, children, or something, so we can all relate to it. So I think it's a really important thing to remember for anybody or for any of us at all. Right, can't see anything unless I'm missing anything. I mean, thank you for joining us today. I mean, I'd finish off by saying we know that we're never going to be in a position where everybody who is vulnerable is going to want to flag that up and say so. But I think it's really important where we have identified people who are in challenging circumstances that we act upon it. We know we've got a long way to go in terms of collecting data. So my plea is always start to work with us, start to share data with us if that's appropriate. I think once we've reached a point of sharing data, and I think it'll probably reach about 10 million records that are a flow of records that are constantly shared to identify vulnerability. But I think we are absolutely getting there. I think what's also important to remember when we're managing vulnerability, just because somebody is vulnerable, it doesn't mean that it's relevant to our dealings with them as well. So they might flag it up, it might have no relevance whatsoever to what we're actually dealing with them on. But if we know about it, we should be acting on it. Data sharing is undoubtedly happening, and it's happening increasingly. And I don't think we can pretend it's not going to. So I think we just have to get on board now, manage vulnerability in the best way we possibly can, and sort of embrace it and do the right thing, because it's not just reputational, it's not just regulatory pressure. It is absolutely the right thing to do. So if there's no questions, I'd like to thank Kat and Helen. That's really brilliant. Really appreciate your time. We are recording this session. We'll share that. We will share the slides. We do regular webinars. If you follow us on LinkedIn, we always flag them up on there. So if you want to join anything in the future, if anybody has any sort of training needs, support needs, or anything else to do with vulnerability, please get in touch with us. If we can't provide you the solution ourselves, I'm pretty sure that we will know somebody that can, because we've reached out to so many people over the last 8 years. But thank you again, and I'll leave it at that, and I hope you all have a lovely afternoon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.